We're recording. So, welcome,
All
Steve,
right.
to my conversational sort of YouTube channel format. How's it going?
Going well, Eric. Thanks for having me along.
Yeah, so you're someone who I ran into on some expat forums in Facebook there, and I immediately started looking at your profile and your videos and all that sort of stuff, and I just felt a vibe, and you were someone who I wanted to connect with, and it's very beautiful. Just looking into the story, um, and you're currently an addiction counselor, if I got that right, recovery counselor.
Yes, I am more so recovery now, and we'll get into the details about why I say it like that. But as of late, and still valid, if I was in the United States, would be a certified drug and alcohol counselor
Yeah,
license that deals in addiction to, um, certain substances.
yeah, like alcohol, I would imagine is a big one.
Alcohol and drugs, yeah, exactly. That's what that means. But really over time, it became the attachment to anything similar that might maybe get the credit for to making us feel better. And it doesn't always involve just alcohols and drugs. It can be any number of things that we do repetitively and in a way that can destroy us or harm us
Yep.
physically and most importantly mentally.
I've been on my own journey with alcohol over the past little while, and over the past, half of my life, basically. And it's a very interesting journey because it's not always obvious why it feels good to have a drink. We'll get more into my story and stuff like that, and what sort of insights you can apply to my situation. But let's talk about the story. Like the thing that got me is like you actually had a liver transplant,
I did,
which
yes,
is
and
kind of like the dodging the bullet of the whole thing itself, isn't it? Was liver transplant related to alcohol use actually?
is more related to it began with drug use and then as another condition there was three conditions that were solved on the day that I had the transplant. One was liver cancer, one was hepatitis C, which
Hmm.
caused it mostly at the beginning, and then one was the cirrhotic cirrhosis of the liver, which is anytime there's hardening of the liver to where
Yeah.
it can't self-repair itself anymore.
Hmm.
And so the combination of drugs and later alcohol led up to the fateful day when I was diagnosed terminal in 2011. And
Wow.
then years later, it ended up developing into liver cancer.
So let's talk about your youth. What was the thing that took you to the drugs and alcohol and all that stuff? Like what can you pinpoint it? Like
I think the drugs and alcohol to me became sort of the manifestation of an existing safety blanket that maybe I'd woven for myself young, because as a child, I moved an awful lot. I went to 10 different schools before ultimately dropping out of high school in the 11th grade. And I lived I lived in two different states and then multiple locations within those states, which is not something that's, that uncommon, although that's a lot of schools, granted. But through that, and because I went from living at different parents' house and at time in-laws houses when I was younger, or extended family, I should say, not in-laws. But because of that, I sort of developed a detachment from the world and a sort of I have to live on my own kind of way. And earlier in life, I escaped into fantasy novels and things like that. Like at a young age, when I read The Hobbit, I became one of those kids that was obsessed with the Lord of the Rings, in grammar school and then into high school, and then a lot of other stuff like that, which actually helps later in life. After we'll get to that later, to get me into a more spiritually based lifestyle. I sort of tied those two together in a way. But in the meantime, after, like I said, I dropped out of high school. I bought a one-way ticket out of Chicago, Illinois, which I was living at the time, to the West Coast as far as I could get, and that was to Idaho. And so I packed a backpack, got on the train, Amtrak, took it to the Spokane station, and started hiking in the mountains. And that only lasted a short amount of time. But what it did is then I joined the Army. When I joined the Army, alcohol became big in there. And through high school, it'd been like pot smoking,
yeah.
maybe once trying in those days what would have been mescaline. This is the mid 70s. So it wasn't like true like acid experience, LSD experience, but it was dabbling in that stuff. But the military changed all that for me, and
Well, it's a
I
high
went
high
into
pressure
harder
environment,
drugs.
right?
And of course, I chose to go into combat arms in the infantry, and so I pushed myself really, really hard. I wanted to jump out of airplanes. I wanted to do all these things, and so I did those things, and along the way, became pretty good at it and was promoted fairly quickly. And you had to keep that razor's edge. So that's when I started dabbling for the first time in what in those days was called crank, which I believe today, if you were to draw a line to it, it'd be closest to methamphetamine.
Okay.
It was just strictly amphetamine, but it allowed me to operate in peak performance, and it wasn't able to be tested. So that's when intravenous drug use came in, and that's likely where I developed or caught hepatitis C from sharing
Yeah.
needles.
Yeah, likely.
Something
Yeah.
that we wouldn't learn, something that I would not be diagnosed with until 2017.
Oh my God. So, wow.
Yeah. And
And
that would
did
have been
you
in 1986, 86, 87.
like I've been prescribed amphetamines, for example, for attention deficit disorder, and it's pretty heavy stuff, and you can keep going for days, but then when you want to like ease off of it and stop, it can be tempting to just like drink yourself until you pass out. Were you doing that as well?
In those days,
Yeah.
uh, no, I was doing it to where I never passed out. It was the exact opposite.
Wow.
And so, because like I said, I was in a very hard charging, you could say, part of the military of the army at the time, and it was all about being highly effective all of the time.
Yeah. I mean, there's parallels in a lot of different worlds, like the business world, like all this
Hmm.
stuff where people just feel that they aren't good enough if they just calmly go about their day, but they have to, work more or
Right.
push harder and stuff like that. And so how did that develop into like the next stage of your life after the military? How long were you in the military? And how was it
Well,
as an
I was at
experience?
well, breaking those down as an experience, it depends on which aspects you're looking at. It was not a good experience when it comes to how I was using drugs and alcohol when I entered versus how I left.
Yeah.
It was not a good experience when it comes to seeing something through. I had wanted to re-enlist. I wanted to go to even a more exclusive unit than I was currently in. But those began to deteriorate because of a number of things. Obviously, among them, the drug and alcohol use that was increasing. And so I got out in 1988.
Hmm.
So that was the end of me in the army. But then I didn't have anything to go back to because, like I said, I was a dropout. I had bought a one-way ticket from home, wound up in the military, and I was kicked out of the military. So while I was in the service, a friend of mine had introduced me to the Grateful Dead. And so I pretty much, get this, went directly from being in a U.S. Army infantry unit to following the Grateful Dead around the country,
Wow.
which I did
And that's
off and on
legendary.
till,
I
yeah.
mean, it's one of those legendary
So,
scenes that you like still want to hear that. I
but
know it must have been
the
one
thing
of,
is, the
yeah.
thing is, in that, really briefly, there's a couple of areas where those two are really, really unique in a way that you can't explain them without having done that. It's especially when it comes to the Grateful Dead, and I don't mean that like the difference between being in combat and having to explain that, but the military mindset of togetherness and all that is commonplace in the business world. You could more easily understand that as opposed to this abstract space of a bunch of people that follow a band around the country and then live off road and as nomads the rest of the year.
Yeah, well, I've had my
So
own band and toured with the band and all that stuff, and
right.
usually alcohol was the only drug that was involved, and I can imagine if there were more drugs that were involved, it would have been even crazier. So,
That era didn't feature any of the amphetamines. It featured only the hallucinogens.
which is,
And so,
that's
yeah, I mean, it was safer in a way,
yeah,
but as far as keeping my feet on the ground, but the camaraderie and the way that everybody has each other's back, and how separate they are from society,
oh yeah,
and how they have their own language and their own places they go to, and all this, that really that resonated strongly with me. So it was an easy transition, believe it or not.
wow, yeah. I mean, so from one collective to the other, and kind of just trying to find your way. How old are you at this point when you're following around the dead?
early 20s.
Okay, so still quite impressionable.
Yeah, very
And
much
where did
so.
it go from there?
Well, from there, it went to Jerry Garcia dying in 1995, and me having just prior to then discovered the internet. Not discovered it like Columbus, but found the internet, I guess, like Columbus, and began my time online. And when I didn't have anything to do after that, I relocated to the West Coast and set up shop in a town where ultimately I would end up going to college at Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon, where I studied what was then being put together, things like Netscape in the very earliest days of the .com experience, of which I worked in since then.
As a developer or?
In those days, we were building what is today the what became ultimately the College Sports Network on Yahoo Sports, which I
Okay.
sold to Yahoo 2014.
Okay. Wow. And so you, and so when you were working over there on the West Coast, how was the intake of substances and the patterns of wanting to release yourself? Because having a venture and stuff like that.
That, well, between 95 and 98, when I was getting into the .com space and when I was using hypertext markup language as my official language to get my BA with, believe it or not, machine
Mhm.
language. I think the only person to ever do that at Oregon State. I started making websites and I became profitable right off the bat. And so in 1998, I relocated to, I was making sports media. I relocated to Atlanta, Georgia area because that's where the hotbed of college sports was. And we began a new network that ultimately became what is today Rivals.com, which is the college sports network of Yahoo. And there was just four of us and an idea. And so I did that all the way up until 2014. The last 3 years, though, I just paid others to do the daily work because I was increasingly sick. I mentioned earlier 2011 being when I was diagnosed. But things really changed in 98. The time I was in Oregon, I was still, everyday guy when it came to, well, I guess, or everyday guy. When it came to my intake, it'd be lots of microbrews. It was the beginning of the microbrew thing going on in Oregon, and it's everywhere. And so, I did that a lot. And of course, it can't be in Oregon, it seems, not smoking pot. So there was some of that, but there was never any hard drugs.
Yeah.
And that pretty much stayed the same all the way for about another 10 years. But once I moved to Georgia and submerged myself in the college sports world and became the first, one to stream a live press conference, the first to put up digital videos, the first to start the earliest forms of social media that we had at the time, which is message boards, and became more and more entrenched and had my own radio show at Sirius Satellite and all these other things over those years. It became drinking almost constantly because every space I was in was either at home by myself or at some kind of sporting related event where it would be beer, margaritas, whatever. But since I was the guy, I was the host of podcasts, radio shows. I had this huge network of, I owned multiple team sites around the Southeast, and we were very, very successful. We had deals with CNN at the time, ESPN. We had all kinds of different affiliate deals. We were providing content over the years. So I was always in this space of having a drink in my hand, no matter where I went. Somebody's buying me one or I was having one.
How
And
were the
that is
hangovers?
where the damage, there wasn't any because it was constant.
So you wake up in the
And
morning, have a drink, and then you don't have a hangover, basically.
basically what the mornings would look like at the pit of it all would be to wake up in the morning and maybe smoke some marijuana,
Yeah.
depending, just to sort of start the day off. But by around 10 o'clock, possibly a glass of wine,
Yeah.
and then meet people for lunch. It'd either be people that work for me or people somehow connected to the sports world or fans. And that's when it would begin. And then it would pretty much go the rest of the day.
Seven
And that
days a
went on
week?
for, yep, that went on for the next, all the way up until 2011.
Okay.
But the thing is, during that time, there was none of the traditional kinds of things that you see. There wasn't falling apart of my home. I made more money each month all the way up until like 2006. I was
Yeah.
paying people, I was cherry picking the best in the industry and walking into their office and saying, how much do you make? I'll pay you, 30% more of that, but you start in 2 days. Do you want the job? You get the big stage if you say yes. And so money was never at
Yeah,
all
yeah.
an
So
issue.
you
We
were
were
booming,
rolling in it.
and but you
Right.
you
And
didn't you
so
didn't
none
ever
of
have
those things
a
were there.
your buddy didn't ever let you know, like, hey man, this is too much.
No, because I was so independent, um, which I've been fiercely. Last time I actually had a job was 1990. Like worked for somebody that I was accountable to,
Yeah,
and I had built what became, well, the site was called UGAsports.com, which led into a lot more, and ultimately what you see today out there, of which most of those sites still feature the same staff that I hired a decade ago. Um, I was beyond reproach. It seems like everything that I chose worked. I used to have the saying that I never met an odd I couldn't beat. And no matter what the chaos was, I always found the opportunity, and it somehow always worked. It was just one thing after another. Success. I was the internet boom success story for all those years. And so nobody really ever said anything at all except "good job, man."
yeah. But
And
your body, like drinking that much, like you must have had a very
no, there
robust
wasn't that, buddy.
constitution. Because, like,
There
okay,
wasn't that,
me,
buddy.
if I drink too much, I get
Oh,
a
my
hangover.
physical body, my
Yeah.
physical body. No, nope. That was another thing. Up until, that's the thing. You'd think that somebody that had three terminal coexisting conditions would be somebody that maybe otherwise got sick in their life. It's really the only time I ever really got sick functionally, and I knocked it out of the park. It's like you're terminal. You have 6 months to live. But other than that, I stupid stuff like back when I was in school, I wouldn't miss a single day the whole year,
Yeah.
unless of course I chose to. That's when I dropped out. But so I've always been remarkably healthy. And so I never looked like I was falling apart. I never felt like I was falling
Rock
apart.
solid
Nobody ever told me
constitution,
I was
mentally,
falling apart.
physically.
I never had a DUI. I never had any trouble. I was doing great financially. My family was fine. I bought a house. I owned my car, you know. So, it was easy, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I was still relatively young. I was, blazing through my 30s.
All right. So when did the wake up calls start coming?
The wake up call came on Valentine's Day 2011 when I fell down a flight of steps and landed at the bottom on top of my daughter. They thought I'd had a stroke, and they carted me off to the hospital, and they told me that I had a blood alcohol level that was ridiculously high,
Huh.
and that my liver had failed. Not that it's failing, that it had failed, and that I had 6 months to live. And so at that point, a whole lot changed in my life. um, and so the first thing I did, I literally said, "I don't buy your myth of death," and I checked out. And I pretty much stopped doing everything that day. I stopped. I sort of, the way that I looked at it was that everything up until this point made perfect sense, and I had chosen every step along the way, and I was exactly where I should be, and everything always seemed to be going the right way. But this was not in the plan, that I was suddenly had 6 months to live. So therefore, since I can't figure out what it is I don't know, I'm going to erase everything I think I know. And so, being that I was so financially taken care of, you could say, by the work I'd done, it allowed me then to transfer all the day-to-day maintenance of all of my various properties online to the what became managing editors, and they heard from me one day a month, and that's when I wrote them a paycheck. And they basically didn't see me again except for a couple of times over the next 3 years before I sold out to Yahoo altogether in 2014. During that time, though, my personal life took a huge change other than that, but that's effectively the end of my .com years
Hmm.
in that way. In that I did come back as I am now, but not in sports media or anything like that.
But not even like a monthly management meeting or anything like that. You just didn't care anymore. It was like other stuff had eclipsed your life, and
I had set the thing up to, it was running so seamlessly after about 2006 that I really had nothing more to add anyway. We
okay,
dominated every single space. We didn't have any competition.
wow.
So
So what was the awakening like then?
Well, at first it was pretty much go home and stare off into space, because the next we have to move now into a little bit about the physical realities of having liver failure or failing. There's a couple of terms I'm going to use here real fast. One is a MELD score, MELD, and that's your model end. Now, this isn't the real way, but it means this: model end of life determination. That's the way I began to look at it. It's basically a number between 1 and 40. The higher it is, the least amount of time your liver has left to be, before you're dead. Most people walking around probably have a 2 or a 3 or maybe even a 0. Who knows? We have to be over 15 to be on the transplant list. So there's the MELD score. My MELD score was right at 17, which placed me just above being able to be transplanted because it had indeed failed. But it wasn't otherwise bad because my body with the rest of it was completely healthy. I didn't develop a lot of the other symptoms that people do. But one that I did was one of the more rare ones, and that's called hepatic encephalopathy. I don't even know if I can still say it. Basically, hepatic means liver. Encephalopathy has something to do with your mindset. Basically, what happens is as your liver no longer is able to filter out the toxins in your blood, the toxins are turned into ammonia, and the ammonia goes up into your brain, and there it causes all kinds of misfires. But it's not like just one area, like maybe you can't use your arm or you can't speak. It's any random thing at any random time. And so what it did for me is it almost put me in a state of almost being like in a hallucinogenic state. And it got worse and worse and worse. And I would go for long periods of time struggling to make a form of, I could think the thought, I just couldn't say it. Or absolute lack of strength to the point where I just felt like my soul was like going down a drain in the middle of my body. It's very hard to explain how that felt. And that went on for 4 years.
Sounds like a really bad
And
hangover, actually.
but there's no pain. There's
There's
no
no.
physical pain
Ah, okay.
whatsoever.
So
It's hard to explain. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's like the ultimate loss of hope. As if all of your life force is just being sucked out of your body and there's nothing you can do it and to do it. And in like every few days, there'll be a fleeting moment of 2 or 3 steps where it comes back and you just relish that, knowing that it's going to be gone, and then it is. And then you can't remember what day it is. You can't remember really anything. You can't say, if you try to say there's the microwave, you say there's the mushroom and then correct yourself to the marshmallow, but you can't say there's the microwave. It's a nasty space. But so that helped also with me not having any kind of interaction with my site staff and only having to once my site's staffs having to write their paychecks. But that coupled with the fact that I didn't have to go to work because I was financially solvent,
yeah.
made it so that I pretty much stayed in that same home office and began then to dabble into something I hadn't looked into since way back in the 90s in the Grateful Dead days, forms of spirituality. And so I wanted to find some kind of spirituality that mimicked or that addressed the space of out of body, because my body felt fine, but I was being told I was dying. I didn't feel like I was dying. I didn't believe it. So I had to go out here somewhere. And I found shamanism. Somebody referred me to a shamanic teacher. And so during those 4 years, I did a lot of that. And then in 2015, there was an experimental drug that came out that, or actually it wasn't experimental. It actually was for another disease, but it somehow helped with hepatic encephalopathy, which we refer to as HE. I'll call it HE going forward. So I started taking this pill, which is now called Xifaxan, and it helped. It brought me back to about maybe 85% cognitive ability. And a friend of mine who was a social worker was sort of taken back that I was still going, even though the doctor still had me on 6 months to live, and I just hadn't dropped dead, and nobody knew why. During those years, I had gone ahead and went vegan, among other things. I'd thrown out all religious practices. I just went sort of back to the earth and figured it out there. So that's when he said, well, you know, I do recovery for people coming off of drugs and alcohol, and they act as if when they don't have the substance that they're going to die. How do you feel about that? And I said, well, that's no reason to die. And so I asked to go to one of these meetings, and I did. And within about a month, I was a co-facilitator. And then about the third month, I was a facilitator, and the rest is history about how I eventually ended up on my own, taking the coursework to be certified as a drug and alcohol counselor.
So it's kind of like you had reached a
Uh-oh,
point in your life where
I
you
can't
didn't
hear you.
have. Oh, can you hear me now?
I don't hear you anymore.
Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2.
I don't know
Testing 1.
why.
Okay.
Let me turn off my.
How about now? Can you hear
Can
me
you?
now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so maybe you muted me. Yeah, but I can't hear you now. So if you could turn it so that the mic is
Okay.
what it was on the headset.
How's that? Does
Can you
that
turn
work?
on the mic on the headset? That was better. Hang on, I'll just pause the recording. Well, you know, it's Bluetooth, so I'm an IT technician, so I always tell people, don't ever let them sell you wireless brakes for your car. You'll crash and you'll die. But you know, wireless headset, yeah, okay, wireless mouse, yeah, might not be perfect,
So
but
that's the long of it. That's the long of it. You can edit out to make it shorter if you need, but that's the long of
no,
it.
that's
So
great. I mean, I want this one to be, I like my conversations to be like real and flowing. And so okay, so you've got all, let's backtrack a bit. You had all this money on top of the world, just riding the train that you'd built for yourself on the track that you'd built. You don't have to do anything. You're just sitting there enjoying your drinks. And then you hit rock bottom, essentially. And you essentially have no purpose but to rediscover spirituality yourself. And then you have this drug. It brings you back to who you are, brings you back to your own mind. And then you discover this coaching thing, which gives you a new purpose,
mhm.
something which is meaningful that you can give back to other people and help them as well, while still having this liver, which is, on its last legs. So
Right.
how
And
does it
for
feel
the
when you actually have inside your body this liver that's not optimal by any means, and you're coaching other people? Are you able to speak with a conviction that actually convinces some people of some stuff?
yeah, I don't think I ever had any trouble at all conveying my, I don't want to say authenticity in a self-serving way, but the fact that the things actually happen, the fact that yes, the person sitting in front of you does have a medical clock above their head, and yes, they do have a failed liver. And for the first, like I said, from 2015 until 2017, we didn't know anything other than it had failed. It wasn't until then that in 3 faithful months, in September, I learned I had hepatitis C. In October, I learned that I had 2 tumors in the liver. And in November, I learned that they were both cancerous and that they were the end result of hepatitis C. That's what had caused that as well. So that was a little bit of a odd moment, because for me, you would think that it might have been something that'd be, you know, a setback, but I had come to a point by that point that I had so fully embraced and accepted my place in the world, and that everything was going to be fine regardless of what people said around me. Um, I just sort of on blind faith in myself on that. I had no real reason in the world. Everybody around me was looking at me like I was dying. Um, and one thing along the way that also happened here is, like I said, I sold my company. I was married at the time. The marriage deteriorated. The home that I had bought, we sold, and they moved into a new house, and I moved into living on my own. And so that happened along the way too. But in those first couple of years, when I was just doing recovery meetings before I started to do a whole lot, first year and a half before I started not doing a whole lot, doing individual sessions, um, it was never, one of the things about recovery meetings that they don't like is when we talk about the good old days in a way that somehow makes us wish we were there. Like, oh, that time we got so drunk at the beach, it was a great time. When we talk about the great time, we're romanticizing the rest of it and downplaying the fact that why we're here today is because of that other time, not because it was a great time. And so because that's so easy to do, it'd be easy for me to, launch into a sort of way of doing that in telling my story that sort of made it, as profound as it actually is. Yeah, this guy really did get told he's dying, and yes, he does have this thing. But combined with my other story and my insistence, without insisting that I was gonna live, it was a foregone conclusion with me that there was no way this was gonna be how it ended.
Okay, and you're on a liver transplant list, and like someday you
No,
might get a call.
I am not on the liver transplant list because at the time I didn't have insurance. That's another thing.
Oh,
I was uninsured. After 2014, when I sold the company, I gave up health insurance because it wasn't doing anything for me.
what?
And so,
But then how do you get insured with
Well, that happens in 2017. Remember I told you I was in the Army?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, a friend of mine who had just come back from Standing Rock in late 2016, a Native American elder, believe it or not, that I met in Georgia, he's a good friend of mine, he's a Vietnam veteran. He came up to me one day when I was out in the blue, sort of in and out of reality. It was during the time I was taking the medication, but on some days I'd still be pretty distant. And he's like, Steve, why don't you go to the VA, to the Veterans Administration, and see if they'll help you out? It had never occurred to me to do
because
that.
you've been on your own company, your own insurance and all that stuff. Yeah.
So I did that in the spring of 2017, and that's what ultimately landed me at the Augusta VA Medical Center in Georgia in September when they did those tests, and that's when they found out I had hepatitis C, and then the next month the tumors, and the next month the cancer. And at that point, they said, you need a liver transplant. We got you. And so they took me under their wing.
Oh, wow.
And so the rest from that moment to now, I've been fully covered by the VA in all this stuff because of my time in service. And so that was huge in the medical, strictly scientific medical side. Didn't do much on the other side, but on that side. But what it did is it gave me something more I could grasp on to believe in too, that would help me in the way that, I'd gone so far out in this shamanic path that I had no business even thinking about regular doctors and all this. But people that were caring and finding problems and identifying them and come up with solutions, I was like all about it. This is a valuable tool. It's a gift given to me. I'm going to do whatever these people want, and I'll continue to do what I've been doing on my side. And again, we're going to get through this. And so that's how I ended up getting, all the additional treatment, you could say, that is ridiculously expensive for a person that wasn't insured going into this. But I also volunteered for some newer things along the way that are now commonplace in transplant, of which I was one of the first people to test out.
Wow. Okay, so can we get on to the transplant, the sort of like climax of the whole story, I suppose?
Yeah, the transplant. Once we got up to the point where I was reassigned then to the Pittsburgh Medical Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because there's 5 different transplant centers in the United States. I got to pick which one. All the other 4 had
only
glowing
5?
reviews for veterans.
Ah, right. Okay.
For veterans.
Yeah.
Veterans. Only 5 VA health medical places do transplant. And so you get to pick. And so I looked into all of them, and 4 of them, it was all about how awesome they are, and they're so friendly and so nice. And then there was Pittsburgh, where it said they were the best at what they do, but they're complete jerks. I knew nothing. They're hard to work with. And so I said, well, that's my team right there, because I'm not looking for a friend. I'm looking for effectiveness. And so I'm so glad that I did, because I ended up with a doctor that is notorious for other people saying he's difficult to work with, that I had a great relationship and still do to this day.
The genius,
right? Yeah. And he's actually rated as one of the top in the United States, and so that was great. So that was a rigorous program of the initial battery of tests, where they tested all kinds of things over the series of months, from heart rate to psychological to my financial to my social life. I mean, a psych thing. full-blown mock-up of all my blood, and since I hadn't drank or done any kind of drugs or anything at that point for 6 years, my blood was in incredibly good shape. And I was still vegan at the time too. And so, I mean, physically, other than the fact that I had these massive conditions, I was in great shape. And psychologically, they determined I was in great shape too. And so they signed off to do it. And so what happened next was, because of the location of the tumors, it was looking pretty grim because it was right up on the edge of the liver, right next to one of the major arteries. I forget the exact words. I knew it more at the time. I was hyper educated at the time, but it's slipping now, old story. But if it were to advance at all, it would immediately be in my bloodstream. Now, granted, it's all in your bloodstream, but this was a bigger deal because it was right there. And plus, I'd be off a transplant list. So I volunteered for a new program that they had where what they did is they went into my liver and they shot the stuff that chemo into the 2 tumors, and then came right back out, went right back in and cauterized them like a little cocoon, like a spider would do. And so the agreement was that if I didn't develop another tumor or they did not grow within 6 months, that they would almost double my MELD score. Remember that score from the beginning, from 1 to 40? I would go from, by this time also, I had worked myself back down to a 15. I was almost off the transplant list, despite the fact that I had a failed liver. But so I did that, and we made it 6 months. And so my MELD score went to 31. And then the next thing they offered me was a new test program. They said, well, let's, as soon as this is over, you're going to have to go through. They had just discovered.
How do you feel at this point? I mean, like, how do you wake up feeling in the morning? Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Every day was the most beautiful day in the world. If you go back and look at my videos, the video that I did right after I got the diagnosis, I was doing lives in those days. I had a big following on my cancer blog. And so I announced it to the world by saying, hey, Facebook, I've got some heavy news, but it's encouraging. I have cancer. And what I meant by encouraging was that I knew that I could now become worse and have a better chance of getting a transplant. Quote, worse to get better. And so I was thrilled. And I've got a whole series of, if you look in from December 2017, a whole series of videos where I was just every day talking about how great this was and how this was going to really change everything. And so that was the same, that was the similar attitude that I had talking in those recovery meetings. And that just is the way that I sort of embody my persona throughout the entire thing. And so I went through some of the most physical painful moments in my life, particularly taste, when I had to hold myself open in a certain way while I was awake, and they went with a pin through between the ribs because they had to get right. But if they got too close to the aorta or whatever it was going to cut it and I'd bleed to death. If they missed it, they'd have to do it again. So I had to hold my chest just right, and I could feel the needle pop, pop, pop going through the various layers of skin. That was the hardest.
For a biopsy or?
It was the same would be as a biopsy, but they were going in to squirt the stuff. And so they went in that way. They went back up through an artery in my leg to do the next part. But so there was that. But back to the story, since I had the hepatitis, they didn't want to try to cure the hepatitis while I was still sick because they didn't know my liver could handle that kind of an assault. So the plan was get the transplant. And then right after that, to take 14 weeks of this new drug they had called Mavret, which in 2000, I don't know, like 14 or 16, they had finally found a cure for hepatitis C, not just something that in previous years would make it go dormant. Whatever they do to it, just tell it to leave and it does. And so the question became, well, what happens if somebody takes a liver that is otherwise healthy, but has hepatitis C
in your blood
as their transplanted liver? Can my body then take the transplant, live through that, get rid of the hepatitis C? Because what that would do is that it open up the amount of available livers to other people, because if somebody just has hepatitis C and it hasn't damaged their liver and they die in a car accident or whatever it might be, most people are not going to want to take a liver that has a terminal illness built in, but I had the terminal illness already. So they asked me if I'd volunteer for that. And so I
you
said
would
yes.
get the liver of someone who tests positive for Hep C on death, and then you would essentially be first in line for that liver because you're the one who signed off on this.
So once again, I said yes. And so those were so three things. The three test things I was involved in was the thing that they wanted to see if this drug could really cure or somewhat help with hepatic encephalopathy in 2015, which allowed me to come out of it enough to start working towards becoming a counselor. And also on the side, I was doing a lot of shamanic work in those days. I don't really do that anymore, but in those days I was, because that was still my thing more so than what I'm doing now. So there's that, and then there was TACE, which was relatively a novel way of approaching it. They hadn't really done that before, I guess, or not many times. And then can somebody take a hepatic liver that's otherwise not damaged and then cure themselves, go through the thing afterwards. So I did that. So on January 3rd, 2019, I received a liver transplant from a 39-year-old woman who had hepatitis C, who had died the previous evening of a drug overdose. Her liver, other than that, was not damaged. And that's the liver that Dr. Cacciarelli, the doctor I mentioned, he had already turned down 2 other livers for me because he said that I was going to die of old age and not of a bad liver by taking a bad one. And so he made the command decision, you don't want these livers. This one, he said, go for it. So they flew me up there and I got it.
So wait a second, when you're on the flight, you know that this could be your last day on Earth, right?
I've known that for a lot of days.
Right. Okay.
But
So,
yes,
so you're just like at this point.
Yeah. In fact, there's stories right along those lines. And when I'm actually on the bed in the hallway, which we get to in my news show, the actual arrival there. But to wrap up the hepatitis part and the liver, it was successful. I went through and about 2 weeks after the transplant, I started the 14 weeks of taking the pill twice a day on time, and right on time. It had to be like every 12 hours, and I nailed it. And since then, I've been through 2 genome tests, radiation, and all that, and there's no hepatitis C and no cancer, and I've not had a single drawback or anything negative go with the liver transplant. And I'm now on the bare bones medicine that they could possibly put me on without telling me I don't have to take anything.
Wow. Congratulations. How does it
Yeah,
feel when you wake up from a liver transplant? What, and they tell you it seems to be like
pain. There was no other thoughts than extreme pain when I woke up because of what was happening. Oh my God. When I woke up, this hurts to even think of. First off, I had 40 staples across.
Okay.
This is raw. I had, at that time, I think 4 different tubes coming out of my body with bags attached to them that would be with me for the next couple of weeks. But they had me on my side, which is the only time I really moved off my back for the next few weeks. And they were holding me down and I was screaming. I wanted water. I was totally incoherent as to what was happening. They were pulling out other tubes that were in me. And that was the most painful, chaotic few moments of my life, the coming to. But then when I rolled back over, they immediately shot me with, Dilaudid or something really powerful.
I'd imagine they can't give you too many drugs because they are processed by the liver.
No, but they know what they're doing. And so, no, they'll never give you too many. We can talk more about the pain stuff in a minute. But once that happened, I remember looking down at my feet first thing and seeing veins and bones in my feet and ankles again. It was the first time because the buildup in water in my body. I had gotten all the way up to as high as 247 pounds, and I'm usually around 195, 200 as an adult.
Yeah.
Today, I'm at about 167.
Okay.
That's been 2 years ago this month. But I saw that's how fast my body flushed all that out of me. And my eyes were white and my fingernails were white. And it was like the world was electric. It was so bright and present and real, and it's remained that way since.
Wow. So you didn't notice how dull your body had become until you.
Oh, I immediately, it was like I had just come out of a muddy pond and looked at. But the funny thing is, I've thought about this a lot. When I was out there, particularly those first few years, as far out as I was in consciousness and or however you want to look at that, um, I went to a lot of places that I think I found a lot of healing for myself and a lot in sort of unexplainable ways. I think when I came back, you know, a lot of people talk about, you know, breaking the old paradigm of their life or you know, finding their whole self or whatever it might be. I think what may have happened with me was that during those times that I was out there so far for so many years, um, that I found a lot of places of solitude, or not solitude, but sort of comfort that I can go to really be removed from the stress of any situation, or nothing bothers me at that level. Sure, I get upset, I get angry. We all do that at various stupid little things, but nothing is permanent. Nothing's ultimately going to go wrong. And when I look back at the life prior to it, it's like I had watched a Netflix series about that guy, and I know all of it. I've watched the series over and over again. I know all of it, but it's only a series. It's not really me. Whatever of my life, all the thoughts and beliefs were shattered in 2011, but then they were so buried or just let go of for the next 8 years that they didn't reassemble.
But
And so when
somehow.
I came back, they reassembled in a way that I sort of built on all the positive things in my life and just keep building from them. Similar to the way as when I bought the one-way train ticket from Chicago, when say I'm never going back. It's been sort of like that, because then what I did is, after a year of recovery and getting my strength back, then I began planning on continuing my remote work that I had been doing around the various areas of the United States. I've seen the digital nomad space and all that, and thought, well, I've been working online remotely since '96. I've got I can take my revenue source wherever I go in the world, because I do online counseling now. And so away I went, and that's how I wound up in Colombia.
Nice. And so the last couple of years for you must have been like a dream, man.
It really all has. These last few years um, are definitely, they stand out. But you know, there's other side little things, not to get too much oversharing here, but I've been through multiple failed marriages for different reasons, largely due to work, I would say, going back, which is ultimately me, and of course the other, but still. And then you know, we had a suicide in my family when I was young, and then I had a brother die, and so those are things that a lot of people encounter in life. But when you look at the regularity of them and how high they are, it's almost been a dreamlike experience the entire time.
Amazing. So, I mean, if there's one takeaway from all of this, what would you tell somebody who would be struggling with addiction right now? What do you tell people when they're struggling with addiction? You know, even if they are this sort of high performing person, because in that story, I see a lot of myself. Like I can be, you know, very functional when I'm drinking. I can, you know, I've gotten my drinking down to about 3 to 4 days a week now, you know? So I'm very good at stopping. But when I do drink a little too much and I go a little too far. And so, what would you say to someone like me, like that I still do drink? I have scaled it down a bit. What's the biggest takeaway? What would you tell someone like me who's struggled a bit with it, but now sort of has it in line? And what would you ask?
With that one, there's two ways that I could approach this. One is not what you're asking, and that's sort of approach to it, which I think would encompass this. But to specifically talk about the drinking and gauging moderation or whatever it goes, however you want to phrase that, it would still be fundamentally the same message. And it's kind of abstract, but that's really the nature of the places I've been at and the way that I even became a counselor. And so that's sort of part and parcel to the way that I work. First and foremost, all the choices you make are your own. And that means the consequences as well. And that whatever has happened in your life, if it still hurts, that's because you're holding on to it. And if you can start saying those things and believing those things, then you can believe in yourself to determine, all right, do I want to make a change? And if the answer to that is yes, you make the freaking change. You don't think about it for forever. You do it. It's a cold way of looking at it. We make every choice that we do, especially when it comes to drugs and alcohols. As much as you'll hear others try to talk about being a disease and all these things, I'm not trying to shatter anybody's. I don't want this to land too hard. Put it that way. This isn't one of those kind of sessions, but you do in fact choose these things.
Yeah, of course.
And you can't catch substance abuse walking down the street. It's not that kind of disease. Now, is it a disease of dis-ease? Yes. But again, that's your choice, and if you don't like it, change it, Crazy Horse said, I think before the Battle of Little Bighorn, it's a good day to die. And I think that's hogwash. It's to go out and be victorious in whatever you choose to do. If you don't want to do it, don't do it at all. If you want to do it 100% and do it because you chose it, you believe in it, and you'll find success.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm very good at choosing what I want and succeeding at it, I think.
I lost your audio again.
Oh dear. 1 second. Let's just do your thing.
What happened? It just drops out your audio.
Yeah, it's tech. Well, anyways, yeah. But okay, so it's like that's very interesting advice that everything's a choice. But there's this one addiction counselor who's very popular on YouTube called Gabor Mate. And yeah. And what he always asks is, what does that do for you?
That's the thing. That's the thing is about addiction is to really understand addiction, or whatever word you want to put in there to define that space, or to illustrate that space. You have to know what is the perceived payoff. What is it that we believe we're getting from this? There's plenty of scientific data out there you can look at about how alcohol actually impacts the mind. Dr. David Hawkins talked a lot about how the brain actually has different sensors of positive, negative energy, goes to certain receptors, and that alcohol covers the negative ones. That's why you only see the good things in life. And then later on, after the alcohol wears off, you give credit to the alcohol for having made you feel better, when really all it did literally was mask your problems, that being anything that gives you negativity, which is something you need to resolve.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So if you look at it like that, then we'll see now that the perceived payoff of that is, the payoff is they're not seeing the negative things in their lives. So they're hiding from it. They're running from it. And so, but again, when we're actually talking about substance issues like this in session work, you might not say it with this amount of pointedness, but again, these are decisions, and you're choosing the payoff too, because the part of the payoff you might not be choosing, though, is the part where you wind up like I did, where you all of a sudden you wind up and they say, oh, by the way, that last drink you had yesterday, it should have been your last one, but it wasn't, and so now you're gonna have to come see me for the next X amount of years.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And that could be anything from psychological damage to driving intoxicated and you hurt somebody. I mean, there's all kinds of other payoffs that are built into that are really heavy, that we choose to say, it's no big deal because it's cheap and it's on TV, it's advertised, it's a thing to do.
And all my friends want me to do it with them.
And that's the other thing. All my friends want me to. But see, now what we're doing, when we say all my friends want me to, now, whether we like it or not, we're speaking out of the victim mindset, because now we're saying, if I could, but I can't because of, and insert any number of things here. And again, that's where you start to get into the triggering language of how overused some psychological terms are these days, the victim mentality. I mean, we all have that to some degree because we don't want to take accountability for our lives. And there again, that might sound like a thing that's a little too pointed for some to hear, but you're standing exactly where you put yourself.
Yep, exactly.
You
No,
know,
I know that more than
there are exceptions. Yes. I mean, there's a horrible crime and random things like that, or, there's going to be different things. But for the sake of what we're trying to talk about here, these are choices that we actively make, whether we admit it or not. And these are things that we can change, whether we admit it or not. And as soon as we admit it in ourselves and have courage, back to David Hawkins, that line between positive and negative energy starts at courage, then we believe in ourselves. And then hope goes from just abstract hope to the knowing that you will get through it, make the fittest decision. There's always an opportunity. Just make the best one. And if you do that long enough, you'll eventually get where you want to go.
Yeah.
But if you just look at the problem and say, I can't solve it, well, right there, you're shutting yourself off from the fact that, no, there is a best thing in every situation.
Well, I did some soul searching recently. I've been actually treating myself for alcohol. I was always good at like drinking and not drinking. Like both, I was very good at doing very excessively. Like excessive not drinking, like I will not touch it for, 4 days, 4 weeks, whatever it was. But then when I would drink, it would be like, yeah, you open up the can of worms and it comes out. So it's kind of like two me's going on here, right? And but no, yeah, okay,
Well,
you're right.
no. It sounds like without, I don't want to be,
Let me
Mr.
just
I'm
give you
in
the
your head. I know
conclusion I
more than you.
reached, so
Go.
you can go back. Yeah, I realized that I was using it to numb my senses, and that I had some sort of assumption that me and my intelligence and my truth was somehow not accepted in this world. And the alcohol made me remove me from the feeling of not having my intelligence. It makes you dumber, it makes you more social, it makes you more like people want you to be somehow. And in my case, I think, like I'm not like a loud drunk. Well, yes, I am a loud drunk, but not an obnoxious drunk who says things he regrets. I was just, more comfortable with myself and interacting with people, and then more comfortable switching off at night with a drink and stuff like that. So I realized I was actually using it to dumb myself down, to fit more into situations, and to make it easier to just deal with the sensitivity that I've been gifted in this life. And that was a key revelation. I've been treating
Hmm.
myself with a drug called naltrexone. Have you heard of it?
I have,
Yeah,
yes.
so I've been treating that for the last couple of years, and what it does is it takes away a lot of that feeling of alcohol taking you to God, because yeah, it
Right.
really, yeah,
And see where you can build on that is to also the knowingness that naltrexone isn't truly doing that. It's helping you.
yeah,
And it's helping you to one day be able to do that on your own. But
yeah,
see, what's happening here, and something also to look at, is that as it helps you and you do those things that you felt you couldn't do before, now you can look back at yourself, and that's where you start to grow that courage in
yeah,
saying, hey, I don't just have trophies on the wall. I don't need somebody else to tell me I'm doing fine. I know I did this. I got here myself.
yeah.
And start building that personal
And
confidence.
also the personal
And then,
commitment that you're
right.
going to take this thing an hour before you get drunk. It's like a
Yeah,
big step.
right. Always read the label. But another thing, I think, and it's hard, I think, sometimes to look at for some, or for all of us really. You think about the so-called bad hair day. When's the last time you had a bad hair day when you didn't leave the house, when you stayed home and you weren't on a Zoom thing?
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
you probably never have. If
Actually,
you
when I
do
was
have a
in
bad hair
Mexico just now, I didn't have a haircut for 2 months. So it was feeling when I was on the pillow at night, like there's too much hair here. I
okay.
hate this, But yeah, okay, good. I
But
get
that's your personal thing. You're
Yeah,
saying, yes, I want to get a haircut. But if you go to the traditional version of a bad hair day, like I'm out in public, oh my God, my hair is not done right.
yeah,
That we don't think of that until we see another person, and then we realize that person is viewing us, and that our hair might not be acceptable for whatever that reason is.
exactly.
All right. So with that in mind, if we can acknowledge that happens, there's that saying out there that when we see something in the world, we see ourselves reflecting in it. And usually that is something that is negative. Like we see something we don't like about somebody. It's a reflection of something that we see in ourselves that we don't have, or maybe they have something that we don't have. And so looking back at the question of you and taking this for the reason of whether or not your opinions and thoughts and things that you say will be taken by other people could be looked at as the bad hair day.
Yeah.
Because obviously when you're sitting there by yourself, all your thoughts make perfect sense. And so given that same kind of courage to say what's on your mind, regardless of what others might think about it, is part of what you're probably shooting to get to.
As my business gets more and
There's
more successful, it becomes easier to
exactly
be that person because
right. And
it's all
that's the
based on
thing.
my ideas. Yeah.
You just get up there and let it go, and that was one thing early, very early in the world of me being a facilitator of groups. At first I get up there and be like, what am I even talking about? I don't even know. And then I realized that we were connecting on spaces that maybe weren't in some manual that I was supposed to be going by, but yet we were all getting something out of it. And that gave me the courage just to keep going in that direction, which ultimately was my demise in working in a practice because I refused to do everything extremely by the book.
Yeah.
But lastly, on that note, one fundamental thing that we can always remember, and this goes both ways for how we feel about what others say and for what we say to others, and that is that how I send something is on me, but how you receive it is on you.
Yeah.
So, in that are all the kinds of misunderstandings that might just simply be translation or feelings that shape our beliefs of what we just heard. And now that's a fact that's what that person said, and so we always need to remember that how we feel about others also is entirely up to us, is that message there.
Well, the
And the
biggest game
same
changer,
about how we feel about how they view us.
the biggest game changer for going through this journey of using naltrexone and slowly seeing where the lines are of when I go off into that, it's the biggest game changer has been I don't drink on Sundays, you know? And
Mhm.
to achieve that, you ease off on Saturday. So maybe I'll start on Thursday and I'll go blah, 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 Thursday. Friday, you sort of work most of the day. And then, in the last 2 hours of work, you open up a beer or something. But then Saturday's like, okay, yeah, maybe I'll meet one more person and have a couple more beers with them and then ease off and wake up on Sunday. And the other part of the Sunday is I am committing nothing to anyone. I'm not committing anything to anyone on Sunday. So it's a day that is solely for me and based on what I want to do spontaneously and do that. And I'm going to eat what I want. It's the day when I eat the most junk food as well. And just like, I'm going to be me, free man on the land, not drinking, eating whatever I want. And then I wake up on Monday feeling like $1,000,000 because, then you get a good sleep, go to bed whenever you want, wake up and just, so that's putting that one me day and having it not interfered by alcohol, because I used to drink, through Sunday as well. But now it's like, and then I'll go all the way until usually Thursday or even Friday now, and no drinks whatsoever. But then on Friday or Saturday, there's usually a couple beers or something, and less and less. And I don't know. I don't know if your story had you stop very dramatically, but the naltrexone stories that tend to be people healing from that tend to be more like this gradual thing where it's like, yeah, maybe I don't need to drink on Sunday. Maybe I don't need to drink on Thursday. Maybe not Friday. Maybe not Saturday. Maybe not more than once a month. Maybe not at all. So I hope I can find it. But yeah, it's also an emotional thing. It's at the core, it's an emotional issue that you're escaping from something. And it's
Mhm.
a very functional thing for that. So
Right.
yeah.
There's a couple of quick things here. One is what I call the relative level of pain,
Yeah.
and that is sort of a non-fixed line that people reach to where they break,
Yeah.
so to speak. Whether that is you got in a horrible accident and you hurt somebody, or you got liver disease, or you just decide once and for all, I'm going to make a change. That's when that happens, and that's when change, breaking happens, and that's when you have to rebuild to some degree. But all of the things that you talked about there in setting aside Sunday as a day that you don't drink, regardless of what gets us to our relative level of pain and how quickly we can actually affect change, whether that's overnight or over a period of years. I've worked with people that have been struggling for decades, and then suddenly they're like, wow, I never thought I would have quit, and they did. Um, but what you're already establishing is one that all of these share, whether it's overnight or over 30 years, and that is a form of boundary of some kind of self containment, self awareness, however you want to look at that. And B, it might, we all want to be sort of our master of our own time and space. Like, we know everything that's going on in our world, and we have control of the things that we feel we need around us. So we're in control.
Yeah.
Well, that's the goal, but who really has that? And so sometimes we don't feel like we have any at all. So if we can just at least start with a little beachhead of, say, Sunday or just Saturday afternoon, whatever it is, once you plant that and do it, again, now you're going to be building confidence.
Yeah.
And you're all kinds of positive stuff when it comes to your mental and physical health during that time. And then you can spend that time when you are really clear to really, really reassess. That's one of the most difficult things when it comes with the phase of leaving drugs and alcohol, not once you've stopped, but that's where you're still doing it, is that, how certain are we at any point that we're really, really thinking with a clear mind if even 3 days a week we're somewhat doing something? Now, granted, it depends on what it is, but still, it's the whole, like, if your body is going to be registering it has alcohol in it for 3 weeks after you drink it, well, is your mind still the same? I mean, so how it's the beginnings of forming little times where you can get some clarity, and the wider those get, the clearer you'll get.
Nice. Well, thanks for that. And okay, so, well, I think you've given a great story of how you got where you are today. It's super inspiring. And you've given a little sample of what sort of type of insights you can give for someone like me who, I admit that I still have, an issue, even though it's being sort of shoved in the closet or kept in designated boundaries or whatever. What does it look like for someone to work with you? What does it look like, the process, and how does it work if someone wants you to be their counselor?
There's basically two tracks of people. Those are ones that are in usually the earlier stages of recovery. There might be some relapse here and there, but there's usually not much of active use going on. But that doesn't mean there can't be. There's a certain amount of that is sort of a holdover from when I was just doing drugs and alcohol. But what happened once I got back from the transplant is that I moved more into the space of working with people who are already successful, and that you can define that as you like, in life. And so they know they can do it. They've got confidence, but maybe they're besieged with some kind of problematic situation in their life that seems to not have an answer.
Okay.
That might be a little bit more grave than I don't want to belittle anybody's problems, but something, I've had people facing prison time, people that are making career changes, increasingly a few people that are asking questions like, well, what do I have to do to be a digital nomad? And granted, that's not the same, but what it is the same is, how can you really let go of all that story you have of everybody you've been since day one? Everywhere we go, we got to carry our story. Hi, I'm Steve, and then here I go. This is who I am. Well, if for whatever reason that posture right there is no longer tenable, then there's, again, sort of that relative level of pain, and you need to transcend that. And also in that group are people that have used other types of either esoteric or clinical counseling or whatever, that are just looking for a different approach altogether. And if they're willing to give me a chance on that, then we do that. And so those are the two tracks, basically, either quasi recovery support going forward, or a person to talk to help you identify the positives in whatever negative situation you might be in, or even letting go of the old you.
Nice. And is it all about addiction, or is it things that are also? It sounds like you do everything.
Very little of what I do is, if it's not directly related to recovery, and those the other people, it's mostly people similar to myself that are professional, that are usually single. They maybe travel a lot, or for whatever reason don't want to be have to have a regular schedule. Like I meet with people wherever they're at on their time zone. I
Yeah.
have a woman in Hungary that I talk to at 3 in the morning. Well, I did, I don't anymore, but I've got um, some other people that are very transient in their lifestyle. So, you know, we set it up to meet either 2, 3 times a month, whatever, and go. And if they need to talk ahead of time, I'm available for that, usually within a couple hours. So I'm very flexible because I know their time. They live a similar lifestyle to me in some regards when it comes to that, some of them. And then on the other side, though, in the use department and things like that, I also have a large veteran population because I'm a veteran. And so I've worked with, and again, now we're also talking about things that are not just the drugs and alcohol. Now you need to, there's a lot of letting go.
Like PTSD and stuff.
Any number of things. Yeah. I mean, there's TBI, which is a little beyond my scope because that's traumatic brain injury, that's physical.
Yeah.
But although PTSD, that's not something per se that I do like in a program thing, but there is that space there of letting go that is still applicable. And since I'm a veteran and the way that I am pretty pointed and direct in the way that I share my thoughts and things, just as I hope the other person does the same.
Yeah.
You know, because we're trying to change here. We're not talking just, this isn't in the space of theoretical. We're doing this. And so, you know, there is no option of failure. And I don't mean that to sound too military, but what's the use of doing it if you're not going to win?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's well, it's not always black or white
No,
at the
it's
same
not. But
time.
I mean,
Like
win
there's
in that you're going to get to a place that you hoped you can get there. It might not look exactly like you plan. You know, like there's the old adage, if you shoot for the sun, at least you're going to land on the moon and be at a better place. Well, I mean, that's nice, but that's not far enough. You can still get to the moon and keep going. It's all about building that courage to see. It's a combination of having the courage and then being able to see the next best move and actually taking it, or being complacent in your life. And then, you know, at that point, you're either settling or you're where you want to be. It's your choice.
did you ever imagine that you'd be where you are now? Like in
No,
the last few years, like 5 years ago, did you imagine it was gonna all sort of like, wow, you've got a life again?
the one thing I did know that I told myself throughout the entire time was that as soon as the conditions were right, that I was going to leave the United States, and that I did.
What about the
When I
United
got the
States has actually made you want to leave? Because I'm a
because
long-term
I
expat. I
because
haven't
I
lived in
because I
Canada since.
traveled the U.S. I've traveled the U.S. pretty much nonstop, except for the years in Georgia. Um, Both in the military and then, of course, in the Grateful Dead. I was all over the place for several years. And then I lived in outside of New York City. I lived in Georgia. I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and then I lived in Portland, Oregon, and I actually lived in Kansas. So I lived in all 5 areas of the country, and I never really felt like I belonged in any one of them. And so during those years of being sick, I said, when I'm done, where am I going to go? And I said, I'm going to just try somewhere all the way new. It was not running from anything. You know, I've never had a problem finding success, but I just wanted to see the world and just to get out of it all. And plus, I had to leave all the story behind. You know, I don't need to tell the cancer story every day. And of course, today this is fine. This is a positive way to talk about it. But I don't stew on it. I don't.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I had this thing. If I thought like that, I wouldn't even be here because the doctors were obviously not fond of the fact that I was going to be traveling, especially during COVID.
Yeah.
But they also knew that there was that, you know, having worked with me, that was the way it was going to be, and they've been
Yeah.
supportive of it, and it's all fine.
I mean, I haven't lived in Canada where I grew up since 2011, so like
Hmm.
coming on 10 years now. And
Right.
I just sum it up. I learned as much as I could about being a human being there, and
Hmm.
I moved on. That's it.
I think I've learned more about being a human being with other human beings in Colombia than in such a short period of time than I could really think of collectively anywhere else.
Nice.
Granted, you know, I went from one culture to an entire another one, so there's going to be a lot of new things there. But after being here now, almost 4 months, and having moved around the country so much and spent a lot of time in very small places, um, the overall feel among the population of unity, of their Colombianness, or they're just, I don't even know if they think that. They're just, you are a human, I am a human, everything's fine. I mean, people are very genuinely helpful and friendly. And it's just, I was really taken back. At first, I thought it was this sort of whole grass is always greener on the other side of the hill. Look at me, I'm out of toxic United States, because at that time it was a month before the election, and it only has gotten a little bit worse, I think. But landing here, the freedom from all that was one thing, but then it just kept and kept and kept and kept, no matter where I went. And I was like, wow, this is really the way these people are. I really enjoyed every bit of it, and it's changed me.
That's good. I mean, I when I moved to Serbia, I felt a very similar vibe.
Right.
Years into it, it does look different, but and I yeah, but enjoy that, man. Enjoy that, because it's
Right.
those types of societies, and it's the same type of place where people are much more collectivistic. They're much more caring about the felt human experience rather than the success thing.
Right.
Right, and it's a very
Right.
important thing to tap into, because it helps you feel more of your own roots as a human being, and more what made the civilization that we live in great in the first place, that
Hmm.
was lost in the 20th century, modern capitalist thing. But yeah, I mean, it's like there's so much out there to discover, man, and there's so much, like, yeah, I would like to invite you to Serbia sometime to come over here when you
Well,
get a chance.
we are supposed to be going. We haven't talked about the fact that I'm sharing my life now with another nomad,
Yeah,
but the two of us are on the schedule for Croatia in July,
yeah,
so we'll
cool.
be close.
We'll see how the whole
Closer.
situation shapes out, because yeah,
Yeah.
just keep in touch, and you'll be really
Yeah.
close. So but yeah, it's a similar place, but it's much more touristy over there, and I don't think they're that
Right.
excited to see tourists like they are in rural Colombia or in Serbia, for example.
If it's open, Belgrade was on the list as well.
Definitely, that's where I'm at. So you're welcome here anytime I'm here. I'll show you around, and teach you a bit about what this part of the
Appreciate
world
that.
has to offer in terms of authenticity and just history and culture. So
Oh, hey,
yeah.
by the way, I know we're probably going long, but you're not really bound by that. Um, I really appreciate the video that you did on Tulum.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of personal reasons. I have a sort of, I don't want to say love hate, but that space they talk about like that when it comes to the spiritual community.
Yeah.
It's the fine line between, okay, quasi just fluff and bypassing, or the depths of something that's really there. And so when we were considering Tulum, I hadn't heard much about it, and not that you really came down one side or the other on that, but I loved the honesty, and I feel I got a very, you came across very authentic, and I feel like I learned something. It was
Excellent. I
probably
was
similar, but it was probably similar to how I might react. I could tell by the things you were identifying and the way you put it that, yeah, this is probably how I feel.
well, I mean, it's a yeah. I really have not had such a mixed perception of a place that I've been in a
Mhm.
long time, because it had a vibe to it, which is like, if you look between the cracks, there was something magical going on there, but it wasn't in the hordes of gringos that were coming there, but it kind of was. And then you had lots of spiritual people, but then you had lots of fake spiritual people. And I don't even know if it's condescending to call somebody fake spiritual, or if it's condescending
I
to
know.
call somebody this, or call someone, or make a judgment on the whole situation at all. It's just there was a fundamental paradox on the whole thing, which basically just I lend it to this really awkward point of history where we are, where we're
Hmm.
moving into a post-capitalist, where people realize that, like you, I suppose, in 2011, that you can make a bunch of money and have all the success in the world, but then you're not going to be happy, and every person is transitioning into that more sensitive stage in a different way. And
Exactly.
in Tulum, the friction of the people who want to go and spend, $300, $600 a night on a beachfront bungalow or whatever it is, and just party it up, and the people who are actually looking for something beyond just a party, and they're actually looking for something more in the ether or something. That
Right.
it was an interesting place. I'd recommend checking it out, but don't go too far out of your way to do it.
Well, see, that's that honesty. Earlier, when you were talking about, maybe using this to help you gain the confidence and what you might perceive others might not feel favorable about you saying. When you look at digital nomad type videos, not to pigeonhole you in a label,
Yeah,
but that
yeah,
was
yeah,
the style.
yeah,
Almost always it's, oh my God, look at this wonderful time. We did this, we did that. We ate the best food every night. And,
yeah,
only we ate, the unicorns. And to see one that wasn't complaining about things that obviously they probably had done to themselves, like a bad Airbnb or over and over again. Yours was very honest, and you were out on a limb.
yeah. That's
I
my
mean,
yeah. It wasn't. Yeah, I don't want to
yeah,
talk about the mundane things. I want to talk about the meaning
right,
of things. When I go to a destination, there needs
exactly.
to be meaning and stuff like that. And there's so much meaning in this world, and it's just
Hmm.
like you have to go to the places that resonate with who you are and the meaning that you're looking for. And I felt that
Exactly.
the weirdest part about Tulum is it was one of those places while simultaneously not being one of those places. And that the people I was socializing with were the types of people I wanted to meet, while at the same time not being the types of people that I wanted to meet. And like there was I've never seen anything like it, but it was quite fun, quite
Right.
fun, and
Well,
I don't regret
maybe
the trip.
they felt the same, and so it balances out.
Oh yeah, no,
There's our little mysticism moment.
I'm very polarizing as a person. I'm always the guy
Right,
who's a
right.
little too intense and a little too
Yeah.
straightforward
Make
and a
people
little
think.
too, yeah. So
Right,
that's
right.
it. Anyways, I think we're gonna draw this to a close, being almost at an hour and a half now. But
Okay,
let's catch up another time. Hopefully,
let's do that.
you'll get over here this summer, and you know, it's been really lovely talking to you. So thanks a lot for telling your story.
Thanks a lot for having me on, and yeah, look forward to maybe running into you down there in the digital nomad space.
Yeah, and we'll put the link in the description for your website where people can get in
Okay,
touch with you. Cool. Thanks a lot.
gracias. Adios.